Hello, welcome to Maverick Workshop. In today's video I'm going to go over what you need in order to turn your first kit pen. We're going to use the Slimline Kit Pen. I'm going to go over the different components that you're going to need in order to turn it. You're going to need a lathe. This is a Jet 1221 variable speed, and it's lasted me 3 years so far and still going strong. Here is our setup for turning a Slimline Kit Pen. We've got our kit with the appropriate drill bit size. We have our CA glue, our blank and Sharpie. We have our Jacobs chuck, our 4-jaw chuck. We have our barrel trimmer, our mandrel. We have measuring calipers, sandpaper, plastic polish, pen press, and our turning tool. Before you get too far in the process of making your pen, you want to make sure that your kit has all the components to it. You have the nib, the 2 brass tubes, the center band, the twist mechanism, the clip, the end cap, and the ink stick. And lastly, you want to make sure that your blank is long enough for both brass tubes to fit inside. Now that we know that we have a complete set for our kit, we are going to move this stuff to the side, and then we are going to measure our blank on the brass tubes. So as you can see, I've made the lines on the blank with plenty of room on both ends for my brass tubes to fit inside. Next step is to go cut on the lines, and a extra trick to make sure that you keep the orientation of the blank is to put a line marking the blanks once they're cut. You know the orientation of them. I've cut the blank into the appropriate size that is slightly larger than the brass tube. The next step is for me to take them over to my lathe and drill the 7mm hole into each of them. We are over at my lathe where I have my 4-jaw chuck set up with the blank mounted. I have my Jacobs chuck and my 7mm drill bit. I'm going to turn the lathe on to 700 RPM and drill all the way through. After I drill to about a 1/2 inch or so, I'll back the drill bit up, clear it out, and with the lathe off, I will advance the bit back in, lock the tailstock, turn the lathe back on, and then continue drilling. And I'll do that every 1/2 inch or so. Once you know that you're starting to get towards the end of the blank drilling the hole, you want to make sure that you're going nice and slow. That way you don't blow out the back end of the blank itself. Once you're done with the first one, you switch out, you get the next blank, you get it secured in the chuck, and then you drill all the way through again. Now that we've drilled the blanks, we're going to check the fit of the brass tubes, make sure that they go in, which they do on that one, and the other one, good to go. Our next step is to scuff the brass tubes so they can be better glued inside of the blank. So I have some sandpaper, brass tube, you just pinch it and twist it. Same thing for the other one. You can see that they're scuffed. Our next step is to use the CA glue to glue the tubes inside the blank. And make sure you're doing this over something that you don't mind getting CA glue on. So I'm using medium. I'm going to do a little bit of glue. Make sure you keep it pointed downward so it doesn't go back onto your fingers. Then you're just going to insert it into the tube, kind of work it in, and then seat it all the way in. Make sure that it is... Once we get the first tube done, you can see that we have an issue that we're going to have to deal with a little later with the brass sticking out partially. Not that big a deal, we can fix that. But we're going to go ahead and get the other tube glued in. And that's how it's supposed to go. We're back over at the lathe. I'm going to put the blank that I messed up with the CA back into the chuck. Keeping the brass exposed that I need to trim down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the blank away just so it's a brass tube that has a little bit more brass exposed, so I can put a different blank on top of it, and then we're going to glue it again. Got the brass tube exposed just a little bit, and that's going to go on one of the ends. And then I have a new blank that I'm going to drill a 7mm hole in, and then we're just going to put it on the brass tube there so it fits in, and then we'll use a barrel trimmer and trim it the rest of the way down. About 1/8 of an inch brass showing. I have my 7mm hole. I've also faced it so it's flat, so when you put it together, it'll make a firm, flush contact with the blank that it was supposed to be on. Next step is to go ahead and glue around right here as well as on the brass tube so we can put this together. While the blank and the glue is curing, I'm going to go ahead and measure out my hardware. So I'm going to take the nib and my calipers, and then I'm going to measure the widest part of the nib, which is 8.6, and then I'm going to use my bushings and then measure it against that and see that there's just a little bit of play, and it is 8.5. So right in the ballpark of where we're trying to be with the hardware. There we go. Now we have all of our bushings and our blank mounted on the mandrel. Last thing to do is slide the tailstock up, move our banjo and tool rest over nice and close to our work here. Lock the tailstock, tighten it down but not too tight, and now we can begin turning. An important step that I almost forgot to mention is you want safety protection. I've got my mask on. I've also have eyeglasses on, and then I'm also using a respirator so I'm not breathing in the dust. For this turning, I'm going to use my round carbide from Easy Wood Tools, and it should make this a breeze. Turn the lathe on to 25 to 3000, and then just trim away. have it almost down to its shape that it's going to be. You can see that it's a little bit proud of the bushings, which is okay. We'll do some fine tuning here in a minute, but something that I want to point out is I'm going to grab my clip and I'm just going to take a look at it and see how much clearance I have in the middle area here, because you don't want the clip to bulge up when we press the parts together. And there we have it. That's the shape that it's going to be. Here's my little sanding setup. So we get big sheets of sandpaper that we cut into sizes that we are going to use for the sandpaper, which is approximately 2 by 3 inches. And we just have them 1 through 8. So we start at 240 and goes all the way to 2500. My lathe is now set up for me to sand. I like to take precautions to keep my lathe from rusting, so I have a piece of cardboard with paper towels to absorb the water when I am sanding. And I also have my plastic polish on the side for when I get to that point. I'm not going to go over all the sanding, but I will stop after I'm done sanding and before I move to the polish. I begin my sanding process at 240 grit. And the goal is to just take out some of the ridges from my turning, and then just trying to get it flush with the bushings and get it to the shape, the final shape that I'm going for. And I will turn my lathe on to about 700 RPMs in order to do that. A quick note for darker blanks is you can see these marks right here. What you want to do is you want to use the sandpaper and go left to right, and that'll also help get out some of the scratches that you'll see once you're done polishing. So this is the step that you would take care of that with the lathe off. So the blanks are now sanded to 2500 grit, and you can see that I didn't choose a opaque enough blank because you can see the brass tubing right there, which is okay for a shop pen, but not really okay for you to sell it. The next step is to polish using a plastic polish of your choice. My choice is Magic Juice, which has 6 steps, and I will use a shop towel for it. So I have my shop towel that I rip into 4 pieces. I'm going to turn the lathe on to about 2000 RPM and start with number 1. Here it is after the plastic polish, looking nice and shiny with some of that chatoyance flashing. Now we're going to take it off the lathe and we're going to go back to the workbench and put it all together. Here we are back at the workbench. We have our orientation of the blanks that we just finished in the correct place. The next step is to press the parts into where they go. So I'm going to start with the nib and grab blank. Push it in just a little bit to try and hold it in place if you can. Open up the pen press. Very nice. That is pressed in. Now you can see that's pressed in nicely. Now we need to get the twist mechanism, and you really need to take your time with the twist mechanism because you don't want the ink stick to stick too far out. So you're just going to go in just past the brass part of the twist mechanism. Make sure that you keep it straight as you're advancing, as to not damage the blank or the brass. So it's in place. Now I'm just going to use my fingers to support it and press it in. Alright, you can see I went past the brass where that dent is. Now I'm going to check with my ink stick where it sits when it is engaged. So that's pretty good right there. We're going to go a little bit further, but it's way easier to do a little bit more than to take it back out. So support the middle, press it in just a little bit, and check it again. That's right where I want it. So you grab the middle ring and you put it over the twist mechanism with your hands, and then it just sits in place. And then you grab the last piece, and this is where you can use your clip to maybe hide an imperfection, or in my case, where it is most transparent. I'm going to put the clip right over that. So you can see that it's quite transparent right there where you can kind of see the brass. So we're going to use our clip to cover that. Make sure you get your clip and then your end cap. Put it into place. Adjust. So just to wrap this up, here's all the equipment that we used. We have a lathe in the back. We used a bandsaw. We have our face shield to protect our eyes, respirator to protect our lungs. We have a 4-jawed chuck, Jacob's chuck, calipers, pen kit, blank, appropriate drill bit for the blank in the pen kit, a mandrel, barrel trimmer, CA glue, sandpaper, plastic polish, a pen press, and then your turning tool. And this was our result. That's all you need to turn your pen kit. Thank you for joining me today in Maverick Workshop. I hope that you learned something throughout the process of making a slimline pen kit. If you did, leave a comment below and let me know what it was. Or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. Now that you have the knowledge to make the pen, it's time to put it into practice and make some of your own.